Hello and welcome to this tutorial on preparing to write. Writing a report or an essay in a foreign language can be quite challenging for some people. Part of the reason why it is difficult is that people usually think in their own native language and not in English. Also, writing well requires preparation, so it is important that before you start writing you ask yourself a number of questions. The answers to these questions will help you both plan what you're going to write and help you write in a more effective way. The questions that you need to ask yourself are, first of all, who is going to read my work? Is it going to be read by a client or a customer, or is it going to be read by a colleague? Also, you need to figure out the answer to the question, why do I need to write? A telephone call might be more effective, for example. What am I going to write is also an important question. Is it going to be a memo, an email, or a letter, for example? And lastly, you need to ask yourself, how am I going to write? So what type of language are you going to use? So in this video, we're going to go through these questions, starting with the first question, who is going to read my work? It's very important that you find out who is going to read your work because it will both affect how and what you're going to write. Many essays, reports and emails are written by experts in a particular field. However, the person who's going to read these documents may not be an expert in that field. For example, you may be a physicist, a lawyer or a researcher writing a report for a non-specialist client. Every specialized field has specific and often technical language that non-specialists may not be familiar with. Therefore, it's important, first of all, not to use too much technical jargon. Also, to explain technical terminology in your own words, so you need to paraphrase. And you have to make sure that you explain everything that may be difficult for the reader to understand. Apart from thinking about the use of jargon, it is also essential to consider what the reader needs to know. Only write about essential information, so leave out everything that the reader may already be familiar with. Also make sure that if the information that you're giving is completely new, you state the information very clearly. Another thing to consider before you start writing is what you think the attitude of your reader is towards your writing. Will the reader be interested in what you have to say? And if not, what can you do to make your reader interested? Also, if you're planning to write about something that may badly affect your reader, you may want to choose tactful language. How well you know your reader is also important. Are you going to write a memo for internal communication within the company? Or are you going to write an essay that's going to be published worldwide? If you have never met the people you are writing for, it is likely that your style of writing is going to be more formal than when you're writing for your colleagues. So in summary, before you start writing, ask yourself, is your reader an expert or a non-expert? What does the reader need to know? What you think your reader's attitude is going to be? And how well you know your reader. Why do I need to write is the second question that you need to answer for yourself. In most cases you can choose from other forms of communication as well. Sometimes making a telephone call can be much quicker and more effective, for example. There are, however, situations when writing is essential. This can be the case when you need a record, perhaps for legal purposes, or when you need to convey important or complicated information, or when you have been asked to prepare a report or submit a proposal. Supplying information in writing will give the reader time to think about and respond to what you have written. You may need to confirm an appointment made by telephone, for example, to confirm the date, the time and the location. It is important to establish the aims and objectives of your writing, because people write for many reasons. You may be acting as an advisor, reporting on your investigations into a particular subject and making recommendations. You may be writing a proposal to your colleagues or superiors, for example, to raise funds for something. You may need to persuade a client or a customer, or you may need to write to complain or apologize. If you know in advance what your objectives are, it helps you to focus on the information that you need to communicate and the way to do it. It will give you an idea of the kind of language to use and the style in which to write. Knowing your objectives in advance will also make it easier to choose the relevant information and organize it in a way that you achieve your aims. So to summarize, to be able to answer the question of why you need to write, you need to determine the purpose and think about whether writing is indeed the most effective means of communication to achieve this. What shall I write is another question. The answer to it can concern either the form or the content of what you're planning to write. Your writing can take a number of different forms. For example, it could be an essay, a scientific article, a report, a letter, an email, or a memo. Each form has specific characteristics, and there are many do's and don'ts for each of them. When writing a letter to an external client or organization, that letter presents an image of the organization that you're working for and probably needs to be set out according to certain conventions. The layout for a letter written in English may be completely different from that in some other European countries. For example, reports usually follow a certain format. They are factual and are targeted at a specific audience. A memo is usually quite short and less formal because it is meant for internal communication within an organization. After you have established your goals, you will need to collect the information that you need to focus on what is essential for your reader to know. The following step is planning the writing and sorting the information into a clear and logical format. A good way of going about this is to write down the main points first and then put them into a logical sequence. The last step, how shall I write, is about the type of language that you're going to use and how to organize it. Dependent on what and for whom you're going to write, you will need to choose the appropriate grammar, vocabulary, and functional language. The choices you make will affect the level of understanding of your reader. A phrase like, "may we draw your attention to," tells the reader that you're going to write something that is very important for the reader. "We recommend that" obviously tells the reader that you're going to make a recommendation. These phrases act as signals to the reader and are therefore very helpful. How clear your writing is depends on the length of your sentences and on the grammatical structures that you use. Usually, short sentences using simple grammatical structures are clearer than long, complicated ones. In addition, you will need to adopt an appropriate style. You will need to think about how you can vary your sentences and how formal your language should be. You will also need to think about the tone of what you're going to write. For example, how strongly you wish to phrase a recommendation. The language that you use needs to be well organized because it will make your writing easier to read. In order to achieve that, you need to logically divide your writing into paragraphs, adding headings and subheadings when needed. Also, each paragraph needs to be linked to the next one. The text that you are writing needs to be cohesive, meaning that the words, sentences, and ideas need to be joined together, avoiding repetition where possible. So, when choosing and organizing the right language, you need to think about vocabulary, grammar, functions, clarity, style, and tone, paragraph use, and cohesion. After having answered who are you going to write for, why are you going to write, what are you going to write, and how, you can start the actual writing process. Usually it is advisable to start with a draft first that you can evaluate and review as you go along. Things you need to check are whether your language is correct and whether your message is clear and logically presented. The most important thing is to look at your writing from a reader's point of view. The writing process can be summarized as follows. First, establish your goals and aims. Collect information, Decide what to write and sort and organize your information. Second, consider the reader. Third, choose the language. Think about structure, layout, and cohesion. Also consider grammar, vocabulary, style, clarity, and tone. 4. Write a draft. If necessary, review and evaluate. Step number 5, your final version.